Let us begin the expansion of our consciousness by exploring the so-called higher phenomena. We can no longer dismiss as fantasy the innumerable well-founded reports on the miracles worked by Christ, the saints, and many others. Spiritual healing, reading and transmission of thoughts, knowledge of ancient languages in hypnosis, telepathy, telekinesis, clairvoyance, and an innumerable abundance of similar skills. One should not assume that people of the most diverse cultures could be mistaken or be intentional liars. Evidence of these particular abilities is already being collected and examined by the science of parapsychology. These are nothing else than natural states of a higher capacity to perceive or to act. For the new divine science, a vast area of research is opening up here. The realization of the higher reality begins with the observation of those phenomena of daily life which are still regarded as extraordinary, although so many people have experienced them that we no longer can dismiss them from our world view. Will it be superstition if a man observes all that takes place around him? May he not be justified when gradually he learns to appraise all that is invisibly occurring? More than anything else, the direct sensation of the invisible world is what transmits an understanding of it. Let us now look at some of the so-called higher phenomena which we should recognize, study, and above all make use of as normal everyday reality. Undeniably effective and tested for thousands of years are practices like working with a pendulum or a dowsing rod. By means of his fiery nature, man can discover subterranean ores and waters. Apparently, there are radiations not yet explored, emanating from water or sick organs that a sensitive organism can sense. The conditions of cosmic magnetizations are successfully expressed in the so-called metal and water diviners. The existence of such people has been known since ancient times. Fortunately, contemporary science does not deny these facts. But it is most remarkable that these people sense precisely the subterranean waters and metals. Such a diviner will not react to a tank of water or a house constructed of steel. This magnetism is directed along the fiery channel and responds primarily to the natural state of a substance. How do human beings influence plants and plants human beings? The effect of the human aura on plants is scientifically well documented by the well-known work of Tompkins Bird, The Secret Life of Plants. This investigation is a good example for the coming subtle science. How then does an earthquake reverberate upon all that exists, also various winds and storms? How are the diverse auras of people reflected upon plants? An entirely new institute for research could be established. A sensitive organism is able to sense not only distant earthquakes, but even the approach of important events. Space is linked with each human organism, but do many pay any attention to such influences? If a sensitive organism re-echoes distant earthquakes and eruptions, and trembles at atmospheric manifestations, the same thing occurs before great events. Already long ago was it said that the better people will become specially sensitive before great events. Other subtle, intangible realities are sounds, fragrances, or colors. Their effect on man and the environment should be explored, for example, for healing purposes. The delicate vibrations of the sounds of a symphony or of the colors of a painting actually elevate a human being. Try, for example, to decipher the message of classical music. This is a language without words, which every human being is able to understand. Do you not feel that Mozart, Beethoven, Bruckner and Mahler, or rather the spirit who inspired them, are trying to tell you something? To capture this message is a first step towards understanding the language of the subtle world. In the world beyond, you must be able to communicate without words. Professor Georgi Balan, another exponent of the new subtle science, is a pioneer in this area with his Musico-Sophia school at St. Peter, Schwarzwald, Germany. An immense field of research and practice concerns the nature, the effect and the transmission of thoughts, which are also a subtle, non-material reality. The nature of thought must be investigated. Can thought thunder? The phenomenon of the echo shows that thought, like sound, expands in magnetic waves. Is it possible that thoughts of a certain quality and intensity can influence plant life? How do animals react to certain thoughts? And finally, how do thoughts affect man? How does thought act as an element in chemical compounds? Would it not be advisable to test thought with litmus paper? Could thought not rival virulent poison or music in its power? In general, thought must be investigated as a living factor of existence. We shall discuss this subject in more detail later. Here are just two examples. Explore, like the Japanese Masaru Emoto, another pioneer of the new divine science, the impact of positive or negative thoughts, or of good and bad music on water. The beneficial effect of good thoughts on the food that lies before us on the plate is the scientific basis for the ancient practice of saying grace before a meal. Furthermore, we would like to mention the experiments with thought reading and thought transmission, which are already carried out by the science of parapsychology. Here, too, many examples are documented of how sensitive people produced results that cannot be a coincidence. Do not old married couples who are long familiar with one another know very well what the partner thinks or wishes, even without words? Agni Yoga gives an abundance of hints on how we can develop this ability. Why do dogs and horses sense whether their master is cheerful, distressed, or restless? Do not you, too, perceive the same when you approach another human being? Or is your organ less sensitive than that of the animals? The aura is the manifestation of our spiritual being, invisible, intangible, but undisputably real. Each of you feels the aura, the thoughts, the intentions of a person who enters a room. Make every effort to practice, to develop, and to refine this sensitivity in your everyday life. This is a first practical step towards mastering the divine science. In this way, you will learn with time to better assess the people you meet. A human being cannot conceal his inner intentions. With education of the heart, one can obtain a solid understanding of human intentions. In addition, you will find that objects, such as works of art or old furniture, or places, a cathedral, a battlefield, a room where once a murder was committed, have an aura as well, which you better capture before you approach them. Why do we not study the properties, the effects, and the significance of the glance? How does it come to pass that you notice and even involuntarily turn around when somebody gazes at you from behind? Does not a fiery gaze compel people to turn around and even to tremble? Cannot you tell the nature of a human being from his eyes? People can sometimes notice an unusual light in the eyes of one who is in a state of so-called inspiration, The eyes do not shine from any outside source, but from an inner fire. The glance is like the thought, immaterial or of very fine substance. It spreads infinitely. It can be photographed, but its effects cannot be extinguished. The significance of the gaze can be shown when radiations will be photographed. By conducting a series of experiments, you could observe the distance over which the radiations of the eye act. The physical particles of the glance do not disappear. Would it not be an extremely beneficial task for a true scientist to research the chemical composition of the glance? The glance, like the thought, influences people and objects. There is a deadly and a healing gaze. Once the effect upon the human organism has been investigated, attention ought to be paid to deposits left by the human glance on inanimate objects. If the glance may reach a stage where it has become poisonous, then it might also be able to precipitate its poison upon water and all kinds of objects. Prayers often contain the supplications, "Look thou upon me," or "Turn thy gaze to me." In such words, there is expressed great knowledge of the significance of the look. Precisely, a look can change even the composition of the aura. Not only thought, but the very chemism of a glance has a fiery consequence. Those who know this ask the higher forces to look upon them, because in this magnetic chemism there is contained all-encompassing benevolence. Let us not forget that each look of a man has correspondingly the same significance. The more saturated with thought, the more powerful the glance. It is a joy to see how comforting looks can make the aura healthful. The human hand possesses a magnetism of its own. The hands are particularly valuable and interesting because they contain the media for the expulsion of a peculiar form of energy, commonly termed magnetic. Your emanations are transferred to documents which you write by hand. A manuscript is actually saturated with the psychic energy of the writer. Often the hand that is writing about a lofty subject radiates a light that can be seen against a white sheet of paper. The radiation then accumulates in the manuscript and imparts to it a special significance. These luminous emanations of light remain for many centuries. The coarse, unpleasant habit of shaking hands serves to grasp the nature of another man. Today, we should rather try to sense the radiance of our counterpart with the help of our heart. Certain peoples used to greet each other by smelling. It may be said, what a dog-like custom. But even in this ugly custom there is a reminder about psychic energy, which was used when people by means of smell, touch, hearing and the eye determined the essential nature of a newcomer. Nowadays there has remained the custom of handshaking, which is also not far from the other strange custom. Learn to sense whom or what you should better not touch, in order not to pollute yourself. If man were more alive to the inner promptings of the soul, he would know immediately, at the first impulse to lift his hand, whether or not it were desirable to take the hand of another. You all ought to be able to tell a friend from an enemy, a harmonious or inharmonious factor, the instant a hand meets a hand. But as it is, that power is resident in but few, for the reason that you have trifled with those finer forces of nature to such an extent that their vehicles of operation within your hands have become partially atrophied or paralyzed. It is perfectly natural to consciously use your emanations by placing your hand on the shoulder of someone whom you wish to convince. The thinker, Plato, advised that to convince a listener, one should place one's hand upon his shoulder. Some regard the hand as being sufficient in itself, and suppose that the palm of the hand is what communicates the power of thought. Very rarely do people realize that the fingertips have stronger radiations. Such a transfer of energy is also the basis of healing with laying on of hands. Have you never tried to soothe a feverish child by putting your hand on his head? The rays of light emitted from the ends of the fingers of those who are able to use their hands effectually in healing the sick or operating on the body can be seen and felt very easily by a sensitive person.